My name is Watt, and ever since I heard our friend Frank, I've changed my introduction to say that I am powerless over alcohol, because he pointed out to me that that's what it says to qualify for this program. It's not that I am an alcoholic, that I am powerless over alcohol. But by the grace of God, I'm sober today. And by trying to follow you and the principles laid down in these steps, I have not had a drink since May the 14th, 1946. You know, that makes me sound like an old timer until I get back to our subject of this afternoon, one Jim B. of San Diego, California. Now, you know, us drunks, we kind of like the two guys sitting on the side of the stream there, and a log came floating down the stream, and there was 50 million ants on that log. Now, one of these drunks sat there and said, you know, he said, there's 50 million ants on that log going down the river, and I bet every one of them thinks they're stinging. So, you know, we're all pretty important. We're all spirit of this thing. Alcoholics is a worldwide fellowship of a peculiar sort. We have no offices, no formal organization, no dues. We consist entirely of ex-drinkers whose bonds of union or mutual sympathy, understanding, and brotherly love. We are not seeking benefactions, publicity, or endowment. Only an opportunity to do for some sick alcoholic what a brother or sister alcoholic has done for us. One other possession we hold in common is a belief in God, or a power stronger than ourselves, who alone presides over this strange group. That is not the preamble that's printed on our little wallet literature that's now more or less official throughout AA, but that was the preamble that's written by our group, and I am from the Shreveport group of Alcoholics Anonymous, Shreveport, Louisiana. And the similarity to that preamble that we used back in those days and the one we use today is very, very close. Now, I'm just to be your chairman, and I'm just to introduce the speaker. However, I am an alcoholic, I suppose, because I never did get drunk till I started drinking, and I never sobered up until I quit drinking. And I quit drinking for Alcoholics Anonymous. We're all experts at drinking. Now, when a speaker gets up here, he don't want to point out that I've done this and I've done that. But I think that we'd be selling our speaker short if I didn't point out one or two things. Since he is part of our history, he helped write part of the history of Alcoholics Anonymous. He had to do with the 12 steps in writing our big book, Alcoholics Anonymous. This man's name, and he gave me his permission, his name is Jim Burwell. He called himself one of the under 40 boys, because in the very early days he came in, he was under 40 years of age. He has been sober since June the 15th, 1938. He came in New York. He formed the fourth group in the United States, the Philadelphia group. We have two of his members here who now live in Shreveport. He is the second oldest member of Alcoholics Anonymous from the standpoint of sobriety. Our own founder, Bill W., is number 1, and Jim is number 2. And our speaker sponsor, our speaker last night at the banquet, Frank's sponsor, Clarence Snyder, is number 3. So we're all linked together very closely here. Now, Jim don't want to take too much credit, and like all good AAs, the pioneers in AA, and he is truly one of the pioneers. He wrote the chapter in our big book called The Vicious Cycle, a very fine chapter. Now, in the early days, as I understand it, they didn't go for God too much, the word God. And there was quite a hassle over that, and when they wrote the 12 steps, they just had it just God. And this man, your next speaker, is a man that had them inject the 4 words following the Word of God that you find everywhere in our 12 steps as we understand Him. And they found it worked when they added those words, and it did not work before. It was more acceptable. He is now manager of a collection agency. You know, that's got quite a switch for a drunk. Usually those managers was after that. Now, he was also the chapter of the agnostic in the big book. He is also the man that inspired that chapter because he was truly, by his own admission, a true agnostic when he came in, and he was what they called the image that caused them to write the chapters to the agnostic, which allowed many of us who didn't necessarily disbelieve nor didn't believe either to find God when we come in. I'd like personally, and I'm sure and I'm saying it for all of us, this is to express our gratitude to the Monroe Group and all the people that has put this magnificent program on. I'd like to express our gratitude, and I'm sure the Monroe Group will go along with me on the way the hotel has looked out after us, and we appreciate that very much. So I'm not going to say anything else. I want to sit down and listen with anticipation to what Jim B. of San Diego has got to tell us. Jim?
I would like first to bring a little California over to Louisiana. In California, we always say, my name is Jim and I'm an alcoholic, and the audience yells back, hi Jim. So I'm going to say, I am Jim and I am an alcoholic. It sort of warms it up. It gets you halfway through. I don't need to go any further since Watt has already done it. But first of all, I do want to thank you ever so much for inviting me over here. I don't get on the circuit very much. I'm scared of it because you can get on it and not get off. And I've been in and out of it a long time, and I want them to still like me. And if you don't go back for 10 years, they love you. If you come back sooner, it may not be so good. But it has been swell to come over here and see this little town with such a magnificent group and such a magnificent crowd. I think it is really astounding. Well, I am an alcoholic, as I said, and I'm one of the few people, I bring to AA, that carry papers to prove it. Because in 1942, when I went to work for the War Production Board, I'd been sober about 3 or 4 years. I really got in there on a job way over my head. This is in Philadelphia. And I got in there because I'd helped or been working with a few drunks in the War Production Board, and I needed a job, and it worked out very nicely. So I made up my beautiful application with the ups and downs, as all of us drunks have. And I had to explain a lot of these downs because I hadn't had a decent job since I'd sobered up, really, in the 3 or 4 years. So they asked a lot of questions, very personal questions on that. Because the War Production Board was a pretty tight organization at that time, security-wise. They wanted to know how many times you were arrested. Well, I started scratching my head. And I started putting down, and I did put down very honestly the ones I remembered being fingerprinted. I didn't put down some of the others. And they asked, what organizations do you belong to? And I said, Alcoholics Anonymous on my application. Everything went along swell. I got my job. going along, hell-bent for election, and holding on pretty good. People were covering and working along with me very nicely, and I was helping a few drunks in the War Production Board, best I could. 6 months later, I got a letter, Federal Bureau of Investigation. Would you come down and have a talk with us at your earliest convenience? And we'd like you to call us tomorrow morning. Well, I did, and I went down in the afternoon, and they pulled out my record. They said, we know you're dry, we know you've been in AA, we know you've been sober, we know you've been active in helping a few drunks around Philadelphia, but you weren't quite honest on your application. I thought, well, here goes the first decent job I've had since I've been sober. Said, how about these other arrests? And there were 45 on there listed. Well, of course, there wasn't much answer. But they said, we'll forgive you because of what you've been doing. And he says, well, next time, take this back with you. They gave me a copy of it. So I have papers. So anytime I go to work at my age for the federal government, I will make a good, honest application. I'll just attach a photostat copy. So that was just one little thing of proof. Well, first I've got to qualify a little bit on my own little program, and then I'd like to go into what the early members were like and what they were trying to do, and what apparently John Barleycorn saw different to make it. I was in Washington, D.C., January the 8th. I was talking to Frank last night. The Cumberland Apartments, 14th and Massachusetts Avenue. I was at the end of a 10-day binge. In this 10 days, I'd lost my job, my car, my wife had walked out on me, and I was locked out of my furnished apartment. I'd been in Gallinger City Hospital, psycho ward, for suicide. I'd been in jail. All this was in 10 days. All these things had happened before, but all of them hadn't happened at one time. This is important to me. And I went home to my mother, who had a little apartment, and we'd played this game before, but this was the last time. She was fed up. 4 or 5 day beard, I was completely washed out. Flea bag hotels. She finally said, well, I'll let you come in. She was lost to sight then. If you give me your clothes and your cigarettes, so you won't burn the joint down, and you can have a little dark closet room. Well, anything to get in out of the rain. I was really fed up. And that was January the 8th, when a fellow named Jackie Williams came to see me. I didn't know the guy from Adam. I never heard of him. He'd never heard of me until that day. I'd never asked anybody to come to see me. But my sister, who had known the Southern gentleman in the book, Fitz Mayo, who's died, and Fitz and I had gone to school together, had sicked this guy to come to see me to straighten me up. Well, this guy brushes in, all like this, feeling fine, grand, And he says, well, I understand that you've been having a little problem lately. I said, who, me? Nothing wrong with me. It's just a damn bunch of circumstances. If I could only have a job and a decent front, everything would be all set, but everybody's taking advantage. And he said, well, I was like you. And then he started naming attendants in Bellevue Hospital, where I'd been. He started naming attendants in the Philadelphia General, where I'd been. He started naming attendants at Gallinger Hospital in Washington, who I knew. So I knew he spoke my language. And he said, I've also, and I think today he still holds that record, been in 250 paid sanitariums. He had been the son of a Carnegie Steel president, spoiled brat like most of us are. Well, he spoke my language. He started telling me there was a few people in New York. This was a year and a half before the book. Long before they hadn't even thought about a book at this time. And he says they're staying sober by holding on to each other. They're in what is known as the Oxford Group. I'd heard something of this group, all a bunch of people. Now moral rearmament. And he says they are holding on by straightening up their thinking and by praying to God. There it is again. Here we go again. I'd hit the Sallies, I'd carried the banner. I knew the story of that. This God stuff. Well, I was telling the Reverend Joyner today, I went to Episcopal High School in Virginia. I don't know whether there are any alumnus here. I'd like to meet them after the meeting if they are. And we had Bible reading before every meal. And we had church 4 times Sunday. And I swore if we got out of there, I would never go back to church again. And I've done pretty well, except for funerals and weddings, because this AA seems to work so well. So I've become a pretty damn agnostic, a militant agnostic. I'd been in the First War, I'd seen people killed. What the hell's it all about? But getting back to Jackie talking to me, and he started talking about this God stuff. Well, for the first time, I started talking back. Started telling about myself. Started putting my hair down for the first time in my life, I believe, to anybody. This guy spoke my language. This awful lonesomeness, this uselessness, this frustration, nothing making sense, success, failure, nothing seemed to do any good. You're just a square peg in a round hole of the world. But this guy spoke my language. The funny part of it is that this Jackie Williams, this same Jackie Williams, brought in 60% of the first people that came to New York, and he died of alcoholism. He never could stay sober himself. And that's the key to my start of going to New York and meeting these people. Because we played around together in Washington for 2 or 3 days while I got rid of the shakes. I'll never forget, he took me to a sideshow down on 9th Avenue. And they had some snakes there, and here I was like this. So, this lasted for about a week or so, and I didn't ask too much about New York. I was trying to get some of the things back together again. And Mother had allowed me to stay there for a while. The wife still wasn't talking. But I might have gotten my job back. And then I started really finding a guy that was an expert. He had me licked in spades. Soup to nuts. I pulled him out of one thing after another. Finally, for 3 or 4 days, bad checks and whatnot. Finally, he gave me Bill Wilson's number in New York. This was in Washington. And I called Mr. Wilson up. And I told him who I was. And I told him I had Jackie. What should I do with him? Bill, I can almost see him on the telephone now. Wow, I don't know. You better bring him up here. If you know Bill, you could almost see him. So I did pack Jackie up, and we went to New York. And that was an experience. Mr. Wilson, 182 Clinton Street, Brooklyn. That's not south, I don't think. And at the house was Hank Parker's, who we can thank so much for. Well, Bill talked to me for 2 hours. You see, in those early days, you've got to understand this thing had a spark. Bill had an overnight revelation. I don't mean by that he lost all desire to drink. No, he didn't. I mean, he lost desire practically. And he had this terrific, we always call it a hot flash he had. But anyway, he's kept him sober ever since that time he got it. So, Bob Smith, who was number 2 guy in Akron, was the same way, an overnight conversion practically. So naturally, us underlings that were coming along had to have this experience, win, lose, or break even. We couldn't grow, we had to have it right now. So Bill started praying over me. I mean praying. He walked me down on my knee, and I said, Bill, look, there's nothing wrong with me. I have nothing wrong. I just don't drink. I drink too much. That's all. I'll get that straightened out, and everything will be, get my front, and everything will be all straight. So he worked on me for about 2 hours. Bill at that time had been sober about 2.5 years. And Hank Parker's came in after Bill got through and relieved him. And he worked on me for a couple of hours. And after they talked for these 3 or 4 hours, I don't know how long, it seemed like indefinite. Other boys got together and said, well, do you understand this thing? Have you seen the light? Do you feel this thing? And I said, no. Can I have an aspirin? I never had any more trouble with them after that. They left me alone. I was too hard a aim for them. So I was the militant agnostic of the original crowd. Well, that was my introduction. Now I will go back a little bit to show you my progression in a pattern that may be of some help to some new person here, or newer person. My father was a doctor, fairly well fixed, nothing exciting, in Baltimore, Maryland. I had a rather normal schooling, public school, then boarding school, and then Virginia for a couple of years. And I never had any great ambitions. I never had any great frustrations. What I'm driving at, I'm a great believer that about 75% of us are born alcoholics, and about 25%, like Mac, developed it over a period of time. Any of us we know, if they drink long enough, will develop it. Mine was almost a first drink. It was the first night. But I was trying to get back to the schooling and general activities. And then I go to Virginia, which is quite a drinking school, which some of you all know. And I remember my first drink down there. And this is important. It may be of some use to some of you folks, or you maybe look back and see it. Because this thing happened to me every time I took a drink, the first drink. That first drink, I could feel it going down through every member of the body, right down to the toes. And then each drink after that would be a little less. Then after 4 or 5, it was just like water. One drink or one kind of booze was just the same as the other. It was all the same. But I was always trying to pick up that lift I got on the first one. And all the time I'd go down. And every time I drank, I would try to be the soberest one in the party until I would fall down flat on my face. Rubber legs was my trouble. I wasn't a fighting type. Mine was just common drunk. So that was my pattern, the first drink. And then I go in the Army. It was one night stands, of course. And next day, not too much because it wasn't hurt. I go in the Army at 18. Then I go through for a year and a half on the other side. And we got a wire that the armistice was going to be signed on November the 6th. Well, that was 5 days before the real armistice. If some of the older folks will remember this. So I went AWOL. And at 19, I had a 5-day blackout. I went backwards and forwards across France. I had the slightest idea until I woke up in barley dew on the real armistice day at 19. So I was allergic from the first drink. I like to think that I was a controlled alcoholic for about 10 years, and then the toboggan for the last 10. Well, by control, I mean holding it down to 2 or 3 days at the most. But it was always a morning drink, even when I had controlled alcoholism. It was such an animal. So, being a spoiled brat, not having too much, but having enough, and not having any need for anything particular, I went out and got my first job. At 22, I went to work for a commercial credit company. There were 10 men in the corporation at that time. This is in Baltimore, Maryland. Then now, I think last year they did $4 billion worth of business. I opened when I was 25 years old, I opened up their first branch office the commercial credit ever had outside of Baltimore in Philadelphia. And 2 years later, I was washed out of the finance business as irresponsible, no good, to show you what booze will do. Well, that's just the beginning. This is my control alcoholism. Then I go to work with B.F. Goodrich. And I go to Baltimore branch. And I get a job as a country peddler, a salesman. And I work myself up to city salesman, have half the city. Then I work up, this is all done in about 2.5, 3 years. Then I have the city, and all of a sudden they said, well, they're going to give me the branch at 29. I was 29 years old. The branch had about 60 people in it at that time. And before they gave me the branch, they wanted me to go down to the conference down in Atlantic City. And all the big wheels, the whole country, the national conference for Goodrich Rubber. And I was to be the only salesman in the whole United States that was going to get up and tell them how I'd done this wonderful job on tires. Of course, big shot me. So I go to Atlantic City, hadn't had a drink for 3 or 4 weeks. I hadn't even thought about it. That was always a thing with me. I never knew when these things were coming. I could go 3 or 4 weeks and never have a desire, but once a thimbleful down the rat hole. So I go and check my bags in my room down to President Hotel, Atlantic City. Little sign under the glass. There'll be positively no drinking at this convention. Signed, James E. Swain, General Manager of the B.F. Goodrich Rubber Company. And I hadn't thought of a drink. Who, me? They telling me that? Immediately after seeing the sign, I go downtown, buy a pint, and I have not been back to Goodrich Rubber since. Insanity. Crazy. But they told me I couldn't do it. I couldn't do it. I proved it. Well, that was the beginning of the end. This was in 29. And those last 8 years, 9 years, I had 38 jobs. I'd been in 60 jails, 5 psycho wards, 3 attempts at suicide. And this constant uselessness, hopelessness, worthlessness, constantly, and always battling back. Like most of us drunks going down to these flea bags to hide out, but couldn't stand the stink. But if you go down there often enough, you can take it. It becomes pretty. Then you become a boss down there, and it's not hard to take. Sometimes I wonder who's right, the boys on Skid Row or us guys out working. It's hard to tell sometimes. So that's my little background on drinking. So getting back to New York. Well, Hank Parker's, which I said before, everyone in this room owes their lives to Hank as much as they do to Bill or anybody. Because Hank is the promoter that made Bill write the book. Bill has always been a do-it-tomorrow boy. And Hank is a do-it-now, not tomorrow or any time, but right now. Hank Parker's had been sales manager, Standard Oil, New Jersey, and he's been washed out of there completely when Bill had picked him up in Towns Hospital, where Bill had sobered up. So when Hank offered me a job selling automobile polish that our company he and Bill owned, called the Stanox Company. And I was to go out and sell this polish to distributors wherever I could find them. And we would soon have DuPont out of business, of course. This polish was really good, automobile polish. And Mr. Parkhurst was going to give me $10 a week and my keep. But it didn't seem like much, but here are these big shots. Here's a Wall Street broker. Here's a guy, big sales manager, Standard Oil. He's a good bunch of people to hang around with. I didn't know that they were unemployed and unemployable. They had been, but they weren't. And all of us were that type. At that time in New York, in January 38, there were probably in the New York division, we used to meet in Bill's second floor living room, and we'd have 8 or 9, and we'd sit around the circle, and Bill would be in the center of the little 3-legged stool he used to have sitting down, and he used to spout off because he'd read a couple of books that we had. And that was the meetings we went to on Tuesday night at Bill's. Those were the first New York meetings. And there were 8 or 10 at the meetings, and there were probably 15 or 20 that called themselves part of this fellowship. You see, we had no label, we had no name, we had no text, we had nothing to follow except Bill. And the same thing was in operation out in Akron with Dr. Bob. They had about the same number right there. They had just pulled away from the Oxford group because here they were after 3.5 years with only 4 people sober over 6 months in the Oxford group. And it hadn't worked because we were mixed up with other people other than our own. They didn't speak our language. Looking back, we can all see this now. So Hank is the one that got us to pull out of the Oxford group. We got to do something about this. We got to get a whole pamphlet of our experiences of what we're going to do. Here comes the beginning of AA. So they kept wrangling at poor Bob Smith and Bill, and finally they wrote the stories as they now are in the book. Bill's story and Dr. Bob's. And then they got Dr. Silkworth, who was in Towns Hospital where Bill sobered up on his last drunk, to write how good we were and what we had to do about this thing. And this was our original pamphlet. And we were going to write this up. It's all typewritten. And Hank, the big promoter, says, I know somebody up at Harper's Publishing Company. And I got an in up there. Maybe if they'll print this for us, we'll get 50,000 copies. We thought there were about 50,000 alcoholics at that time. We didn't have any idea what there was. There wasn't any statistics until Yale came into the picture and made a few. And he says, well, I know he'll do this for me. He's an old friend. We'll get it done real cheap. So he and Bill go up to Harper's. And Harper's reads the manuscript over him. He says, Mr. Parkhurst, Mr. Wilson, this is wonderful. This was around June 1938. If you will make this into a full book, we will advance you $3,000. Boy, that was money in those days. Still is. And give you regular royalties. Now, Bill and Hank had never written anything before in their lives. Never thought about writing it. And Harper says, now, if this is as good as I think it's going to be, then we'll have the Reader's Digest come along. And Charlie Towns of Towns Hospital says, I can get Fishbein, the president of the American Medical, to give an okay on it. And we'll be in big business, and we'll sell these books from coast to coast. So that was the original AA, a book-selling deal. whether you like it or not. However, John Barleycorn changed it, and changed it real fast. So Hank said, if it's worth $3,000 to Harper's, we'll publish it ourselves. We'll make $1 million out of this thing. You see, the real idea was that all you had to have was a spiritual experience. Get down on your knees, understand your problem, and no more booze. We have no more idea in the world, I'll give you my word this, in 38, that the reason we were staying sober because we were holding on to each other. We didn't have any idea that was the fact. We didn't know it until a year after the book. We didn't know that that was the secret of this whole thing. The cement between one drunk and another. We speak the language. There's nothing new in the AA book. Everything we have in there is stolen. We've stolen the best. From the psychiatrists and from religionists. But we can feed it to each other. And the original idea was that we just publish books. We'd sell 1 million books. The first year, we'd rather be easy. Unknown publisher and everything. We wouldn't let any one person's name go on that book. They weren't going to let anybody get built up. It wasn't a case we're anonymous. It's just a case that everybody wanted to be in there or nobody was in there. So they started writing the book. Now, this will explain a little bit how this God as you understand it thing, which I do like to say is my little contribution, and I feel it's quite good. Well, I was the only one of those 15 or 20. All the rest of them were agnostics except Bill, including Hank. But I was the only honest agnostic. The rest of them were putting an act on of godliness, but I was honest, completely honest. I was militantly agnostic. So at these meetings, I'd always say, yep, this is all good stuff, but damn this God stuff. That's not necessary. And the boys, this is between January and June. I really had them rolling in the aisles. They didn't know whether they're going to come. But they couldn't fire me because I was selling automobile polish pretty good. They were living on my automobile polish. And I was getting $10 a week in my keep at Hank's place out in Jersey. So I didn't find this out until after a year and a half later that they had several prayer meetings on Burwell. How to get him out. Or how to get him drunk. Well, this is an interesting thing from my point of view, and it's my way of working with new drunks. So, who am I to argue with God and Bill and Hank? I got my suddenly taken drunk. I was on a selling trip up in Providence, sold a bit more than usual on a Saturday, went in and had a couple of beers with the fellows, and that's the first drink I'd had in 6 months. And I didn't even stay for the sandwiches or whatnot. I just walked out of that place, walked around the corner, bought a bottle and went to the room. And then the wire started going backwards, going to New York. It didn't come this other way very much from Providence. I was in a fleet bag in Providence. Broke down and out. And for 4 days I was in this fog. This is the first time I couldn't black out. This is the first time I couldn't get drunk. This is the first time that nothing could work. still thought that even that drink. And those psalm singing so-and-sos down in New York, what do they think they are? I'll show them. And then I'd get remorse. For the first time, I got fired there. I got washed out completely. They wouldn't send me any money, not even money to get home on. And there I was in Providence, Rhode Island, quote, down and out. And my own kind had turned me down. The only people that had made sense to me, that broke my back. I crawled back to New York, and I was wide open for the rest. That's why I always say, and always qualified by saying I did forget once. I always say, if I remember the day that Jackie Williams came to see me in New York, in Washington, D.C., as long as I remember that, that's how long I'll stay serving. I've developed a habit, I've told a couple of people here, that when I go to a meeting, I review that. I review my thinking, that lonesomeness, that uselessness, that nothing makes any difference. It makes it easy. You get a tough day at the office, and you think, is it tough or not? Is it as tough as that 8th of January? And I've never found a day yet that's been as tough as that was. So I got myself drunk, and I came back. So from June to December, they started writing the book in 38. You see, it came out in April 39. So they started writing, and we started getting a few people to write. Well, they started. I was just an onlooker here. I just had this trouble, and I was on the spot. I had to show, and it was a couple of months before I got my job back at $10 a week at McKee. And so I was an onlooker going along trying to sell polish, and they were talking about this book, and they were putting it together. Well, this might be of interest to you, how they did put it together. Ruth Hawk was our original secretary. Ruth Hawk had worked for our polish company, so she was the stenographer. Bill would dictate about a chapter a week, walking backwards and forwards on the floor, and off the cuff. And Ruth would write this down, double space. And we'd send one copy to Akron. One copy would go to our New York Tuesday night meeting, and we would hassle over it. It was changed 100 times, this away and that away. I always claim it was combed by alcoholic lawyers. There wasn't a loophole left in it. So when we got through with the thing, the book doesn't actually say you have to do anything. It says we find some people do it this way and some do it that way. It seems like the people that do it this way have a little bit better luck than that way. But try it that way if you want to. Because that was what us folks were doing. You had to satisfy us all, because we were going to put our money into this corporation. So we were getting along pretty good on the book, how to finance it. We decided, as I said before, we were going to publish it ourselves. So we combed our group, we combed our friends. We decided to set up first an alcoholic foundation. It's now General Service Council. The Alcoholic Foundation was to be allowed to open hospitals, solicit on the streets. We could do anything, sell and operate real estate. The Alcoholic Foundation had one of the most beautiful non-profit corporation clauses in the country. It was beautifully done for us boys. And at that time, they put two non-alcoholics on it. That was Bob, and they had two alcoholics on it. That was Hank and Bill. Bob wasn't having much to do with this book at this time. There's a bunch of screwballs, these New York promoters he couldn't understand. So we had to do a lot of that dirty work in New York. Because Bob still liked the old Oxford group. Then we had three non-alcoholics. And they were friends of Bill. One was Bill's brother-in-law. And one of them was a friend of the Rockefellers. And that was the original foundation. Well, the real idea of this foundation was to get some money in so we could write this book. It wasn't anything else in the world. Then we stopped Bill with his Wall Street background, stopped thinking about cartels, I guess. So we had another corporation. The book was going to be called The 100 Men. And this was in 38. Well, that sounds swell. We hadn't thought about the women. We didn't know whether any women alcoholics or not. We were just involved with ourselves. And all of a sudden, Florence, Ireland, had gotten herself sober. Been sober as long as a lot of us have, most of us, a year. So the 100 Men Corporation, which we sold stock into, we sold stock in the Alcoholic Foundation, we sold stock in the 100 Men, and then Florence comes along. And then we had another corporation for publishing, the Works Publishing Company. In case you're all interested where they got the works from, Hank named it that. He said it works. So that became the Works Publishing Company. All these cartels, we didn't know which hand was which. So the book finally got itself together pretty well at the end of 38. And we still had no name. We still had not mentioned anything about groups. We still only had the two groups, Akron and New York. And it was pretty damn godly. And then we had the battle royal on God. Then we had a psychiatrist come in and say, Bill, you can't do this because it's too Oxford troopy. Make it wide open. So finally, we did get God as You Understand It. I'd been sober then 5 months. I was a senior member then. So then we got a guy at a Rockland State Hospital. He's been in there for about 2 or 3 years for the insane, alcoholically insane. He came down meetings. He had been quite a big shot publisher. He came in when we were talking over the title. And all of a sudden, out of a clear sky, he'd been sober out of the hospital. Well, he'd probably been sober about a week. He said, how about this anonymous alcoholics? Anonymous alcoholics. Now, you want to make this thing anonymous so that they won't think there's any stigma to this thing. And you're trying to get this word alcoholic over it. You see, the alcoholic book, Alcoholics Anonymous book, is the first book that was published really for the layman under alcoholism. It was all the dipsomania, if you had a couple of bucks, or you're a drunken bum if you were broke. And but alcoholic was not known on public level. the medical profession knew it, and there were a couple technical books on it, but there was nothing really worthwhile known. So all of a sudden, we all said, wonderful. We'll call it Alcoholics Anonymous. That field behind Parkhurst, AA would be right at the top of everything, of the publishing list. As I told you before, the book was going to do it. All the guy had to do was get down on his knees, pray to God, read the book, understand his problem. No more fools. Well, after we sold these 1,000,000 books, we'd have $1 million. The net profit, we had it all figured out in this box selling game. We showed you if you bought Colgate at $1 in 1900, how much it had been worth in 1938. Well, the same thing with this AA, Alcoholics Anonymous book. We were going to really build it up. But we decided then, well, there's maybe a few people that wouldn't get well on this book alone. Maybe a few. So what we'll do, we had a lot of us boys there that were experts to try a year or two, a year, 6 months. And they needed jobs, and they had money in this thing. We had to do something for them. So they decided that after they sold these 1,000,000 books the first year, made $1 million. They would open up these trunk farms right across the country for these poor unfortunates that couldn't get well on the book alone. We would have this little trunk farm located, self-supporting. We had it all fixed up that it would be a stockade, and our little cottage would be on the outside. We had it all fixed up for what our salary was going to be, $200 and guaranteed, which was a lot of money in 38. And we had all this figured out so beautiful. So finally, after much razzling-tazzling, we got a publishing company to publish the AA book. He did it on the cuff, and we had to pull those books out 10 at a time. We had to pay $2.50 a piece to get a book out to sell for $3. And we sold them to YMCAs. We had an ad in the New York Times, and nobody seemed to be interested. You should have seen us galloping down the post office, hoping that this thing was going to bring in this 1,000,000 books. We actually sold in the first year 175 books. A little different from 1,000,000. And we were broke. Bill had borrowed, begged, and everything else he could. Everybody had borrowed. And Hank, he and Bill were talking to the Rockefeller people at this time, trying to get their interest. And they weren't interested. And that's a story that comes a little later. I had time. But those are some of the razzles that happened at first. Do you realize that in April 39, when the book came out, us experts that knew all the answers, there were only 8 people in the United States dry 1 year or more in Alcoholics Anonymous. 8. We had 100 names, so we put 100 names down there as recovery. We were stretching things a little bit. But after the book came out, and we all, so many of us found there wasn't any money in the doggone thing, a lot of the boys fell off the wagon. Now, you got to realize, you can say it's hard for these early boys. It was hard in one way for us, but then again, we were going to change the world. We were fanatical to feel that we had this terrific power. We thought we could help other people outside of drugs. The first book said to help others. Didn't say anything about alcohol. To carry this message to others. Didn't say alcoholics at all. We were missing the boat. But after the book came out, and we had number 3 group in Cleveland, we began to see that only those going to meetings were staying sober. These spiritual boys that had nothing else were blowing high, wide, and handsome. These guys that knew all the medical angles, unless they were in the fellowship, they were long gone. And in my estimation, the secret ingredient of Alcoholics Anonymous is drunk to drunk. We are experts. We can take it to each other where the same thing, we won't accept it at all from anybody else that another drunk. But when another drunk lays it on the line and tells us where he came from, what he did, we know he speaks our language. And when we see him sober, it's a challenge. If that so-and-so can do it, so can I. If he's that happy, he's got a couple of bucks more than I have. If I stay sober a little longer, maybe I'll have a buck or two. It's a gradual, if the guy is sincere. Of course, those things only last emotionally short time, but it's a spark. So that was our thing. Now, we would have gone flat on our cans even after the book was published. If the Rockefellers hadn't come along and held a big dinner, John D. Jr. had 100 of the biggest men in the country at the Union League in New York to come in and hear the story of Alcoholics Anonymous. This was in January 1940. 60 of them showed up. Wilkie was there, Saracen from Ford, Henry Ford Jr. was there, Nelson Rockefeller, Foster Kennedy, chief psychiatrist of the country at that time. We had them from some of the personal friends of John D. Jr.'s. And Bill said, now we're made. Ivy Lee, who was a publicity man for Rockefeller at that time, estimated there was $3 billion in that room. And Bill said, this is it. We're over the hump. The book came out. We were $20,000 in the hole. We were going. Ruth Hawk, our secretary, the gal that wrote the book, hadn't been paid. She was a non-alcoholic. Hadn't been paid for 6 months. And we were really in a flop. So at this dinner in New York, Dr. Fosdick got up from the church up there and said, I think AA is good. Foster Kennedy told us about Marty Mann being recovered through Alcoholics Anonymous. And that was the case that Foster Kennedy thought there wasn't a chance in the world. And then Nelson Rockefeller was there. He said a few words. And after it was all done, Bill, of course, spoke. Not 2 hours, as he does sometimes. That him down. He used to give a hell of a good talk. He still does, but I mean, he was short. Not like me, much. So finally, at the end, Nelson Rockefeller said, gentlemen, you see, these people came there. They weren't sure what they were coming for because he didn't tell them what it was all about. And they thought it was another one of those dry things of Rockefeller's. You see, Rockefeller was behind Prohibition. He's the one that got a lot of the industrialists together to help put over Prohibition. And they thought, well, here's another one of those Rockefeller gadgets this time. So after the thing was all over, John D. said, gentlemen, this group is different. I've had you here. I want you to meet these men, talk to this learned doctor, this great spiritual leader, Emerson Fosdick, on what they see in this Alcoholics Anonymous. I believe it's good. But there's one thing about this group that is different than any other group we've been interested in. They don't need any money. As Bill used to say, and the $3 billion walked out the door. But he said, I think enough of this group that us Rockefellers are going to finance Bill and Bob Smith for a year or so while this book is being put over. We're going to give $1,000 a year to Alcoholics Anonymous. No, I 1,000 to Bill and 1,000 to Bob, 2,000. And we'd like you other folks to contribute. And naturally, if John D. Rockefeller puts up 1,000, you know what a little guy like Standard Oil, New Jersey, or someplace like that, he only put up a few bucks. So we did get together, and we had for 3 years $5,000 financing from the Rockefeller group. But we got one thing. We got the greatest thing I don't think it's ever been done before by the Rockefellers. They sent it out on the wires. The Rockefeller Foundation and his friends thinks Alcoholics Anonymous is good. That was worth millions. That was much more than any money they could have given us. Because we had to struggle. We had to hew this thing. We had to bring it down. We had to have John Barleycorn knock us out from under. Hank Parkhurst got drunk. It was a good thing he did. He's the guy that made Bill do the job. But Hank would have run us out of business. He would have promoted us too far. A lot of others. Jackie Williams, who was a fellow who saved me, would have hurt a lot of people if he stayed around long enough. Because he was living on these people he was bringing in. But all these people were necessary for God's way of helping us to form this fellowship, or getting it started on a regular basis. So you can see the growing pains. The Alcoholics Anonymous in those early days was like a floating crap game. Your sponsor was your complete boss. Nobody else counted. He had full control of his baby. And you took dictation. If he got drunk, then you had a chance to pick up another sponsor, which you did. And of course, in New York, they'd all gotten drunk. So Bill was sponsor of a hell of a lot of people in that early crowd. But the kiss of death has always been Bill to sponsor anybody. Funny part of it is, he's put this thing together and done such a terrific job. But as soon as he works on a drug, something happens. You don't seem to go through it. But then we had, a year later, of course, in 40, after this article of Rockefellers, we got our Philly group started, which was done before. Los Angeles started about the same time, and they started going up all over the country. Because we were traveling once, and we would carry from one message to another. And we had to. We were educated in those two original groups, that if we didn't get out and get other drunks, we'd get drunk. So as soon as we moved to a new town, we had to start something. We'd go to the hospitals, we'd go to the jails, we'd go any place we could together. And we were still going down, and we were losing money, and we were about $40,000 in the hole. Where Bill got it, I don't know. At the end of 40, then the Saturday Post article came out. That's the most remarkable thing, to hear that little story. This happened in our Philadelphia group. Judge Dock, whose family owned the Saturday Evening Post, was a great attendant at our AA meetings in Philly. And one day, down there, and I said, Bill, how about getting something in the Post? He said, that'd be a wonderful idea. I said, who do you know? We know Judge Fox. So I took Bill down there, and Judge Fox says, sure, I'll take you down to the Post and we'll get you an article. We go down there, and the editorial staff opened the doors wide open. We've been thinking about writing a story on Alcoholics Anonymous, but wait till you hear the catch. So, they assigned Jack Alexander to write this article for the Evening Post. Jack Alexander was a racket buster. He busted the Hines case in New York, and he busted rackets all over the country. And he was a hard-fisted reporter. And the reason they gave us Jack Alexander, Alcoholics Anonymous was an offspring of the Oxford group. And they would really do a good job on Alcoholics Anonymous and the Oxford group. Busted wide open, this new racket. Well, we didn't know this. Lively, as far as I know, we didn't. But anyway, Bill talked to Jack Alexander. And he said, Jack, please promise me one thing. You won't put one word down until you've visited at least 7 or 8 groups. Jack said, well, I'll make that promise. Well, he says, I don't like the smell of this thing. Because this Oxford group has been an appeasement group. Well, this was at the time of the war, don't forget. Chamberlain, who went to Munich, was an Oxford group. It was an appeasement group. Peace at any price. And they made Hitler pretty damn tough. So Jack he went to Philadelphia, New York, St. Louis, Cleveland, and Akron, or maybe 1 or 2 more, and he stayed to pray. Do you know that article in the Evening Post, March the 1st, 1941, drew more inquiries than any other publication in this United States has ever had? 15,000 personal pleas for help came through 2 people in the New York office who was farmed out to the clubhouse, and everybody was writing letters to these people for help. But the Evening Post said we were good. Rockefeller said we were good. We were in business. Then we became affluent. Bill had lost his house, lost everything. He was living around in different AAs. He hadn't had a new suit for 7 or 8 years. Yet he could borrow $40,000. I don't know why he couldn't buy a suit. But he was that kind of a guy. He believed in this thing. And where a lot of us went out and got jobs, Bill stuck by the ship. And Bill has been a terrific guy on that angle. But then we started flying apart. We started getting mixed up in civic organizations. We started getting money from other people, soliciting on the street for clubs and places. And then we started to get mixed up with WCTU, and we were really mixed up. And the Yale group, and Marty Mann went out with all good ideas in the world, broker anonymity, press labor. Bill okayed it, anything to get the gals, and so it did bring out a lot of women. But from 41 to 45, we were still pretty damn slushy. Anything could have happened. I mean, we could have got mixed up with some religious group, or because there were Catholic AAs and there were Protestant AAs, and there could have been Democratic and Republicans, and we could have smashed this thing wide open. And some of the groups were afloat, and they could have pulled away. Chicago pulled away for a while. So we had all these hot spots around the country, and we didn't know where. Thank God, we never had one thing to go across the country. Not a thing. There's always personal problems in one spot, another one over there. But it's been terrific that they haven't gotten together and made an onslaught on the whole works. And that's the time that they start thinking about these traditions. And that was the cornerstone that held us together. The traditions weren't accepted. They came out in 45. Very few groups, they all said, well, that's for those boys up north or out south or down west. It's not for us. We don't need that stuff here. We used to say that about the 12 steps. They used to hide from a lot of groups. Cleveland Mountain groups didn't have books. They called it Self-Alcoholics Anonymous, but they didn't have any books for sale or on their stands because they were mixed up with the Oxford group for about 3 years. So we needed something to cement this fellowship together. And then the traditions came up, which in my estimation are maybe they are more important than the 12 steps, because our common welfare must come first. We must keep our unity, because without you I'm drunk, and without me you're drunk. And also, nobody in AA is important, but everybody in AA is important. And then the traditions, and then the third legacy. So this thing has gradually been done. Now you can say, Bill is a writer of this stuff, sure. But the architect, the guy that actually built this Alcoholics Anonymous is John Barleycorn. He's the one that socked us into place when we started getting out of line. We started learning what we could do, what we couldn't do, because we could see by the guys dropping off and getting drunk. But this has been a wonderful experience to see this fellowship go through like this. I guess I've talked so long that you're all off the time. But when you get wrapped up in this history thing, I like to bust this illusion that we were saints. We were a bunch of screwballs. In the first place, we didn't think anybody was an alcoholic unless they were in the same asylum. Unless you had a same asylum behind you, you weren't one of us. So when these guys start coming in from general hospitals and stuff like that, we sort of sneer at them. What is he after? What's the racket? What's he want? Is he writing a book or something? So we were right lyric. Now we know. Here's something else I'd like to leave with you as a parting word. There's 6.5 million alcoholics in this country. There's only 3% of them on Skid Row. There's not, the statistics Yale claims, there's only 1.5 million of the alcoholics that AA has even touched. There's 5 million that we haven't even touched. They're guys that got homes, they got cars, they got jobs. But that's our job, to get those people, to save them from going through this ringer. It's so easy to say, when he hits bottom, let him come. How do we know? Suppose that guy hadn't come to see us. It's important. But thank you, thank God, as I understand, for allowing me this privilege. And I was going to say, if anybody wanted to answer any questions, but Rob here said, better not do it, it'll all get into uproar. But if anybody has any other questions on the early days, only on the early days and around New York in general. Now, if you ask me what makes AA work, I'll tell you the same story that Bill and Bob all tell. We don't know. All we know is that it works.